A waitress pays for a homeless man's coffee. Next day, he comes back as a CEO and says 5 words. They say November is the month of gratitude. A pause to reflect on what we have before winter comes crashing in. But for Eliza Vance, November was a month of numbers. 30 long days. 2 grueling shifts back to back. $20 left in her apron pocket like a smoldering coal. And one breath, her sister's breath. Something you couldn't put a price on, yet paid for every single day. November had drained the city's soul, leaving behind a damp gray shell. It tapped icy raindrops against the windows of the corner kettle with an irritating persistence. Inside, the cafe was a fake oasis of warmth. The coffee grinder groaned like a tired complaint, milk hissed in the steamer, and customers' laughter blended into a background noise Eliza had heard so often it no longer registered. She moved like an efficient ghost between tables, clearing lipstick-stained mugs, wiping spilled milk, and smiling. Her smile looked real, but it never touched her eyes. Those bright blue eyes today held the gloom of the skies outside. She was 26 but felt as though she'd lived through centuries of early mornings and late nights. The weight she carried had a name: responsibility. Every thank you she received, every crumpled tip dropped into the jar, was mentally converted into a fraction of her sister Rose's next dose of inhaled medication. 17-year-old Rose, with her golden hair and an almost supernatural gift for painting, was trapped by her own lungs. Her chronic asthma was a silent monster, always lurking, and the only weapon against it was expensive inhalers, only partially covered by insurance. That $20 bill in Eliza's apron pocket burned like fire. It was all that remained after rent. It was the thin line between a quiet night and a midnight eye trip for Rose. Today, she had to buy both kinds of medicine. There was no other choice. The doorbell jingled, a sound she usually ignored, but this time it grated on her nerves. A gust of cold air pushed in, carrying the smell of rotting leaves and exhaust. A man walked in, and it felt like November itself had followed him inside. He looked well into his 70s, thin, hunched over in an old wool coat faded to a color somewhere between mud and nothing. His silver hair was sparse and matted to his scalp. But what caught Eliza's eye were his hands trembling constantly, long bony fingers gripping a battered fedora. His eyes, a lifeless gray blue, stared into the air like he didn't see a thing. He looked like defeat made flesh, a man who had surrendered to life and didn't have the strength to hide it anymore. He shuffled up to the counter, where Kevin, the young manager with slick-back gelled hair, stood waiting. Kevin gave the man a once-over, frowning with thinly veiled disgust. "What can I help you with?" Kevin asked, his tone laced with impatience. A cup of coffee," the man replied, voice soft and shaky, lost beneath the cafe noise. "Hot, to warm my hands." $4, Kevin said loudly, like he was giving an order. The man started checking his coat pockets. A quiet panic spread across his face as he searched one pocket, then another, and another, hopeless. Customers began to notice. Conversations quieted. Eyes turned curious, judging. Eliza stood nearby, holding a stack of dirty dishes. She saw everything, and something twisted inside her. But it wasn't compassion. Strangely, it was irritation. Why me? Why do I always have to see this? A bitter voice in her head rose. There are millions of people in the world. Why should I care about one stranger when my own life is falling apart? I have Rose. I have that last $20 bill. She turned away, trying to ignore it. Not my problem. She had bigger ones. She walked into the kitchen, set the plates down, the clatter sharp with frustration. Leaning against the cold wall, she closed her eyes. A flash of Rose struggling to breathe crossed her mind. Her heart clenched. She couldn't risk it. She couldn't. I don't have the money. The old man's trembling voice floated in from the counter. I'm sorry for the trouble. Then please leave, Kevin snapped coldly. This is a business. Eliza opened her eyes. The silence that followed Kevin's words was louder than the cafe had ever been. It was the silence of complicity, the silence of people choosing to look away. And in that silence, Eliza heard something else. The echo of her father's voice, a good man broken by life who used to tell her, "Eliza, you can lose everything, but never lose your ability to see others." A war erupted inside her. One side screamed fatigue, fear, money, Rose's health. The other whispered her father's voice, this man's dignity crumbling before strangers. She realized that if she turned her back, if she chose safety, something inside her would die. The part her father tried so hard to protect. Damn it. She cursed silently. She took a deep breath. Her hand clenched the fabric of her apron, feeling the $20 bill like it was carved in stone. It wasn't just money. It was safety. It was Rose's medicine. It was also a burden. She stepped out of the kitchen. Her heart thudded violently. Each step toward the register felt like trudging through wet cement. She didn't look at the man. She didn't look at Kevin. She stared straight at the register as if it were the enemy. "How much?" she asked, voice hoarse. Kevin blinked. "What?" "His coffee. How much is it?" $4. "But Eliza, you don't." Eliza didn't let him finish. Her hands trembled as she pulled the $20 bill from her apron pocket. The motion felt physically painful, like removing a piece of herself. She laid the bill on the counter. "Give me the change," she said, her voice ice cold. Then she turned to the old man, who stood frozen, his once empty eyes now filled with surprise and confusion. Eliza tried to steady her voice. "Your coffee," she said, unable to smile. "You can sit over there. It's warm." She didn't wait for a reply. She took the $16 and change, the bills feeling frighteningly light in her hand. Then she turned and walked straight to the break room, not daring to look back. She didn't feel noble. She didn't feel like a hero. She felt lost, deep and cold in fear, creeping through her every muscle. She had just traded her sister's vital medication for a stranger's cup of coffee. She dropped onto the rickety break room chair and buried her face in her hands. Out in the cafe, the old man Silas Croft slowly lowered himself into the seat Eliza had pointed to. He wrapped his bony fingers around the warm cup, letting the heat seep into his frozen hands. He didn't drink. He just looked out the window into the gray November rain. Then, he turned his gaze toward the break room door, where the young woman had disappeared. And in those seemingly vacant eyes, a complicated light flickered. It wasn't simple gratitude. It was recognition. The price of $4 wasn't just a line on a receipt. It was a living, breathing echo that followed Eliza for the rest of her shift. The $16 in her apron felt like weightless paper, soulless, empty. Not safety, not medicine, just paper. Every time the doorbell chimed, she flinched, irrationally afraid someone would walk in, point at her, and shout, "You're a terrible sister. You traded your sister's health for your own foolish pride." Of course, no one did. The world went on. Customers kept ordering oat milk lattes with an extra pump of vanilla syrup. They still complained about the weather, debated politics, and laughed over nothing. But to Eliza, everything had shifted. The cozy warmth of the corner kettle now felt suffocating. Co-workers' whispers clung to her like ghosts. She didn't need to hear what they said, she could read it in their glances. "She's insane," Maya, the part-time college student, muttered near the espresso machine. "With that paycheck, I'd keep the money for textbooks." Eliza swallowed the knot in her throat. Textbooks. For her, it was medicine. The comparison sparked a bitter wave of self-contempt. Just before the end of her shift, as she wiped down the last table, Kevin called her into the office. The room was tiny, windowless, and always smelled of bleach and old coffee dat. It felt more like an interrogation chamber than an office. "Eliza." Kevin began, not offering her a seat. He sat behind a cluttered desk, arms folded, posture radiating a cheap sense of authority. I don't know what you were thinking, but let's get this straight. The corner kettle is a business, not your personal charity. What you did this morning made me look like the bad guy and made our customers uncomfortable. He just needed somewhere warm, Eliza replied, her voice flat with exhaustion. She had no energy left to defend herself. At this point, even she wasn't sure if what she'd done was right. And you need this job, don't you? Kevin cut in, voice sharp as glass. He leaned forward. For your sister. I know. I've seen you rush home on the day she has attacks. I haven't said anything. I've been patient, haven't I? So don't test me again. Next time someone can't pay, you call me. I'll handle it. That's my job, not yours. Got it? The mention of Rose hit like a gut punch. Kevin was weaponizing her greatest vulnerability. Anger surged, but Eliza smothered it. She couldn't afford to lose this job. Got it, she said quietly, eyes on the floor. Good, Kevin said, leaning back. Oh, and I'm docking $4 from your paycheck. Violation of cash handling policy. That to set an example. It was petty, cruel, but Eliza only nodded. She didn't have the strength to argue. She just wanted to go home to escape this place, everyone's eyes, and her own punishing guilt. Walk home felt longer than usual. The rain had eased, but the air was still wet and cold, slipping through her thin coat. Her old apartment complex greeted her with its familiar, mildew scent and dimly lit hallway. When she unlocked the door to their fourth-floor unit, the first sound she heard was Rose coughing a dry, deep, persistent cough, like her lungs were trying to expel something they couldn't. That cough was the soundtrack of Eliza's life. Rose was curled up on the threadbare couch, wrapped in a wool blanket, her pretty face pale. Beside her was her easel and an unfinished painting, a glowing sunflower field under a bright sun. A world far from their own. Rose always painted sunlight. You're home, Rose rasped, trying to smile. I'm here, Eliza said, peeling off her damp coat and sitting beside her. She placed a hand on Rose's forehead. No fever, thank God. How are you feeling? I'm okay, Rose lied. They both knew it was a lie. It was part of their daily ritual to pretend. For the other's sake, just a little short of breath. I used the Ventolin. Eliza glanced at the almost empty inhaler on the table. Tonight, she could only afford that. The fast-acting one. The Flovent. The long-term control inhaler, the truly essential one, would have to wait. Her heart sank. All for a cup of coffee. Regret clawed at her, bitter and late. What have I done? She had chosen pride over Rose's health. I'll go get your medicine, she said, forcing cheer into her voice. How about pasta tonight? The kind with the cheesy sauce you like? Rose nodded, her eyes lighting up just a little. That sounds great. Are you tired? I'm fine. Eliza lied again. She retreated to her bedroom, really just a curtained-off corner of the living room. She sat on the mattress, staring out the small window facing a brick wall. She felt utterly alone, completely drained. Sometimes, she wondered what life would be like without this burden. A guilty thought, one she always chased away. She loved Rose more than anything, but sometimes, love was heavy. She thought of her parents, her father a gifted pianist who never got his break, taught her about dignity. Her mother, a practical woman, taught her about survival. They were two forces inside her, and now, they were at war. Her mother's voice screamed, "You fool, kindness doesn't pay bills." Her father whispered, "You did the right thing. Some things matter more than money." But her father died young from a heart attack, probably from the same quiet burden she now carried. Her mother followed soon after from grief and exhaustion. Only she and Rose were left. Eliza stood up. Self-pity wouldn't fix anything. She had to act. She grabbed her empty wallet and the $16. and headed to the pharmacy. Meanwhile, in another part of the city, in an old brownstone overlooking the river, Silas Croft was not sitting in a luxury car. He sat in a modest study, an oak desk, bookshelves reaching the ceiling, and a worn leather armchair. The room was quiet, except for the ticking of a grandfather clock. This wasn't the Croft Corporation headquarters. It was a sanctuary, place almost no one knew about. He wasn't reading financial reports. He was looking at an old photograph on the desk, a woman with chestnut hair and warm, smiling eyes. Isabel, his late wife. Her smile seemed to ask him, "How was your day, my love?" "I found someone today, Belle," he whispered to the photo. He opened a thick leather journal and began to write with a fountain pen. His handwriting, though aged, was still steady. November 14th. "Today I found someone. A young woman named Eliza at a cafe called the Corner Kettle. She did something Isabel would have smiled at if she were here. She paid for a cup of coffee for an old man in rags, even though she clearly couldn't afford to." I saw the hesitation in her eyes, the battle inside. She gave up something that mattered. She didn't act out of pity. She chose to act and paid the price. He paused, eyes drifting toward the window, where night was slowly settling over the city. His thoughts turned to the tense phone call he'd had with his daughter, Amelia, that morning. "Amelia," he continued, writing, "wants to organize another charity gala. She's calling it the Gala of Hope, a flashy name. There will be red carpets, celebrities, press coverage. She says the Isabel Foundation needs to elevate its brand." Elevate its brand. Isabel would have hated that phrase. Her foundation was never a brand. It was an act, a belief. Amelia will never understand that. She sees the world through the lens of profit and efficiency. She wants to turn the Isabel Foundation into a PR machine, filled with glittering charity balls and oversized checks handed out beneath camera flashes. She wants the foundation's name to be known, but forgets Isabel's core philosophy. True kindness is a quiet act, a stone tossed into a pond without the need for anyone to know who threw it. I tried to stop her. I told her Isabel wanted to help the nameless, not be praised by the famous. I said an anonymous hospital bill paid in full meant more than $1 million donation under a spotlight. She just laughed and said I was out of touch, that the world had changed, that to do good these days, you first had to be seen. Maybe she's right. Maybe I'm old and foolish. But I can't let Isabel's legacy become the very thing she despised most. A performance. I've failed to convince Amelia. Now I have one last hope, to find someone who can carry and protect Isabel's spirit. Someone untouched by money. Someone who understands the value of a hot cup of coffee on a rainy day. That's why I began this search. Not as a test, but as a silent prayer. I've walked through dozens of shops, diners, and cafes. I've seen pity, rejection, and most often, indifference. Until today. That girl, Eliza Vance, I saw the war in her eyes. Between exhaustion and compassion. Between her own needs and another's suffering. And in the end, compassion won. A small, quiet victory, but more powerful than all of Amelia's galas combined. Perhaps it's her. I need to learn more. I have to be careful. Amelia is sharp. She won't stand by if she finds out what I'm doing. She'll think I'm trying to replace her. And maybe she's right. Silas closed the journal. He rose and walked toward the window, gazing out at the glittering lights of the city. A city full of people like Eliza, fighting their own silent battles. His search was no longer a test. It had become a race against time, a desperate effort to protect the legacy of the only woman he ever loved. And Eliza Vance, without even knowing it, had become the center of it all. The next 2 days passed like a fog-laced nightmare. Eliza moved through life in a state of constant anxiety, a tension that curled into every muscle fiber. Her paycheck was docked $4 for a policy violation. a petty punishment that stabbed at her pride every time she remembered it. To make up for the loss, she picked up extra night shifts at a noisy bar a few blocks from home, a place heavy with the scent of beer and broken hopes. Her sleep became restless, haunted by the sound of Rose's coughing and Kevin's disappointed face. She grew irritable and quiet, her cheerful waitress mask growing heavier by the hour at the corner kettle. On the third day, after finishing a brutal 14-hour double shift, her feet aching and her mind numb, she found an unfamiliar envelope slipped beneath her door. It was unlike the usual overdue notices or utility bills. The envelope was made of thick, cream-colored paper, and her name, Miss Eliza Vance, was printed in elegant black ink. There was no return address, only a small embossed seal of an oak tree in the corner. Her heart skipped uneasily. She picked it up, feeling the surprising weight in her hands. Her fingers trembled slightly as she tore the paper. Inside was a card, made of the same fine material, bearing a short message in a classic serif font. Dear Miss Vance, we respectfully invite you to the Old Port Public Library at 3 p.m. tomorrow, Thursday, to discuss an opportunity that may change your current circumstances. Sincerely, the Croft Foundation Administrative Office, the Croft Foundation. The name meant nothing to her, but the phrase, opportunity that may change your current circumstances, did. It felt like a lifeline tossed in the middle of a storm. A glimmer of hope, quickly followed by a thick fog of doubt. Who knew about her circumstances? Who would want to help a nobody waitress? Could be a scam, Rose said as Eliza showed her the card. Her sister was sketching in her notebook on the worn-out sofa. Or someone trying to sell you life insurance. But they know my name. And that things are hard for us, Eliza murmured, reading the line over and over. There was a strange feeling in her chest, a faint connection she couldn't quite grasp. Croft Foundation, Croft. The name sounded vaguely familiar, but she couldn't place where she'd heard it. That night, she couldn't sleep. She lay in bed, staring at the peeling ceiling, countless scenarios racing through her mind. A city aid program she didn't know about? A distant relative leaving her something in a will? Or a cruel prank from someone bored? Desperation and doubt wrestled inside her. In the end, desperation won. She had nothing left to lose. The next day, her heart pounding, she arrived at the Old Port Library. She had dressed in her best an off-white blouse faded by time and the only pair of black trousers she owned, and tried to look as presentable as possible. The library was a stately historic building. She used to bring Rose there as a child, to escape into silence. Inside, the scent of old books and dust calmed her slightly. She asked the librarian and was directed to a private meeting room on the second floor. Boardroom, the plaque read. The name only made her more anxious. She stood outside the heavy oak door for a full minute, took a deep breath, then knocked and pushed it open. The room was grand, with floor-to-ceiling shelves, a long polished mahogany table, and portraits of long-deceased benefactors hanging on the walls. Gentle light streamed in through tall arched windows. But the person who greeted her wasn't the old man from the cafe. It was a woman in her mid-30s, wearing a perfectly tailored navy suit. Her dark hair was neatly pinned back, revealing a face with sharp bone structure and colder eyes. She sat behind the long table, tapping slender fingers on a tablet. When Eliza stepped in, the woman looked up, her gray eyes scanning her from head to toe, not with curiosity, but with clinical precision, like a scientist examining a specimen. Eliza instantly felt small and unkempt in her worn-out blouse. "Miss Vance," the woman said. Her voice was crisp, almost too clear, devoid of warmth. "I'm Amelia Croft. Thank you for being punctual." Amelia Croft, the Croft Foundation. The pieces were clicking into place. But the old man. "Hello," Eliza replied, her voice a bit shaky. She felt completely out of place. "The letter said something about an opportunity?" "Yes." Amelia cut in, gesturing to the chair opposite. "Please sit." Her tone was commanding, leaving no room for refusal. Eliza sat on the edge of the chair, spine straight, feeling like a defendant awaiting judgment. "My father told me about your actions at the corner kettle the other day," Amelia said bluntly, skipping any small talk. "A very generous act." The way she said generous made it sound like a veiled accusation, edged with condescension. "He's your father?" Eliza whispered, stunned. Now it made sense. That old man. "Yes, he has a tendency for eccentricities," Amelia said, a slight, mocking smile playing on her lips. "He enjoys playing roles that don't belong to him. Harmless mostly, though occasionally confusing." She set the tablet down and laced her fingers on the table. "Our foundation, the Croft Foundation, was founded by my mother, Isabel Croft. She was a woman of compassion, and we believe small acts of kindness, no matter how quiet, deserve recognition." She slid a white envelope across the table. It was identical to the one Eliza had received the day before. It lay there, stark and full of promise. "Inside is a check for $5,000, Amelia said, her gray eyes fixed on Eliza, watching every flicker of emotion. "Consider it a gift, a token of gratitude from our family. I've done a bit of research into your situation. I know you have a sister who's ill. This money could help with your immediate challenges." $5,000. The number spun in Eliza's mind. Like a siren, it was more than she had dared to dream of. It could cover rent for months. It could buy Rose the best medication for a year. It was freedom. It was sleep without fear. A part of her wanted to grab it, to cry and scream out her gratitude. The wave of relief almost knocked her over, but something felt wrong. Amelia's gaze was too sharp, too calculating. Her voice too smooth, too practiced. This wasn't a gift born of kindness. This was a transaction. "And in return?" Eliza asked, her voice suddenly steady. The desperation inside her receded, replaced by something she hadn't felt in a long time. Dignity. Amelia raised an eyebrow, clearly impressed grudgingly. "Smart," she murmured. "In return, we ask just one small favor, an unspoken understanding between adults. My father is old, sentimental. He tends to romanticize these types of encounters. We ask that you refrain from contacting or engaging with him again, to prevent any unnecessary misunderstandings going forward. This check will mark the end of our story. A happy ending for everyone." And then Eliza understood everything. This wasn't a gift. It was hush money. Amelia didn't see her as kind. She saw her as an opportunist who had performed the right role in front of a lonely old man. And this was her reward for disappearing quietly. The shock of the $5,000 dissolved, burned away by a rising tide of humiliation. Anger ignited in her, hot and swift. They had turned the one act she was proud of, one that had cost her nights of fear and worry, into something ugly. Eliza looked Amelia square in the eyes. She said nothing. She simply picked up the envelope, pulled out the check, and looked at the number one last time. $5,000. Rose's future. A moment of hesitation. Then she saw her father's face, her real father, the one who would rather starve than play music he didn't believe in. And with that, to Amelia's astonishment, Eliza slowly, deliberately, tore the check in half, then into quarters. The sound of ripping paper filled the quiet room like a challenge. "My kindness is not for sale, Miss Croft," Eliza said, her voice trembling with fury. "And neither is my dignity." She stood up. Shreds of paper fell around her like dead petals on an expensive Persian rug. "You," Amelia stammered, her poise cracked for the first time. "Do you have any idea what you've just done? You're a fool." "Maybe," Eliza said, turning to leave, "but at least I'm a free fool." Just then, the boardroom door opened. Silas Croft stepped inside. He wasn't in tattered clothes this time, but in a simple cashmere sweater and dark slacks. He'd been there likely for the entire conversation. He'd heard everything. And the look on his face was a complex mix of sorrow, disappointment in his daughter, and a deep, unmistakable pride in the young woman standing before him. Amelia, he said quietly, his voice low and heavy. What have you done? The air in the room thick and dense, charged like the moment before a storm. 3 people from 3 different worlds, now bound together by a $4 cup of coffee, stood in a silence thick with consequence. The torn pieces of the check lay scattered on the floor, evidence of a battle just fought. Eliza froze, heart-pounding dots, so this was all a setup. The old man, the cold daughter. She had walked into a game she never agreed to play. She felt exposed, stripped bare, and used out. Amelia broke the silence first. She shot up from her chair, her flawless face flushed with anger and shame. Father, what are you doing here? She snapped, her voice no longer calm and polished. Were you following me? I was trying to protect you, protect our family from a gold digger. She shot Eliza a venomous look, as if she were the root of every wrong. Protect me? Silas echoed, his voice tinged not with anger, but with a sadness that struck deeper. By insulting someone who showed me kindness when no one else did. By measuring the worth of a priceless act with a dollar sign. This is not the woman your mother raised you to be, Amelia. The mention of Isabel made Amelia pause. A flicker of pain crossed her sharp gray eyes. Mother didn't live in the real world. Father, she said, quieter but no less firm. She lived in novels and dreams. I face reality. And in reality, people like her always have a price. I just miscalculated what hers was. Eliza felt like she couldn't stay a second longer. She wasn't a theory to be debated. She was a person. That's enough, she said, her voice shaky but clear, slicing through their argument. Both Silas and Amelia turned toward her, surprised she'd spoken. I don't care what kind of twisted game this is, Eliza said. Her eyes locking on Silas, her anger now turned on the man who started it all. You lied to me. You turned my compassion into something to judge, to use in your little family war. Do you even understand what I gave up for that coffee? Do you even know? Her voice broke. She couldn't say Rose's name. She wouldn't give them that power. Silas stepped forward, pain etched deep into his face. Miss Vance Eliza, he said gently, I do know. I had someone look into your story. I know about your sister Rose. I know the burden you carry. And that's exactly why your act meant so much. I didn't intend to deceive you or use you. Please, just give me a moment. I owe you an apology and an explanation. He motioned to the leather chair nearby, but Eliza stayed standing, arms crossed tightly over her chest. Silas sighed a long, worn-out sigh, the kind of sigh that comes from decades of carrying too much. He didn't sit down either. Instead, he stood between his daughter and Eliza, the reluctant peacemaker. Then he told his story. Not as a billionaire handing down wisdom, but as a husband, a grieving man. He spoke of Isabel, his wife, a concert pianist with a poet's soul, of how they met on a park bench, of the dreams they shared, of how he created the Isabel Foundation, not to build monuments in her name, but to carry on her quiet philosophy, that true kindness is an invisible ripple, not a public performance. Her dying wish was that goodness be spread, not displayed, he said, his voice far away. The foundation once paid off a family's hospital, bill anonymously. It helped build a community garden in a forgotten neighborhood. It awarded scholarships to students no one had ever heard of. That's what Isabel believed in. He looked at Amelia, grief etched into every wrinkle of his face. Amelia is brilliant. She's built an empire out of our company, but she sees the world through the lens of efficiency. She doesn't understand the irrationality of compassion. She wants to turn the foundation into a PR machine, a spotlight, not a lighthouse. Eliza listened, and something inside her softened. She wasn't the subject of a test. She was the answer to a question someone had been desperately asking. I tried to reason with her. She said I was outdated. So I did the only thing I could think of. Maybe it was foolish, but I went looking. I dressed like I had nothing and walked into places where no one would look twice, not to trick anyone, but to find out if Isabel's spirit still existed in this world. To find just one person who still believed in kindness without applause. He looked Eliza straight in the eyes, and in that gaze, she saw something raw and earnest plea. "And then I met you," he said softly. "Out of everyone I've come across, you were the only one who fought through your own exhaustion and self-preservation to do the right thing. You didn't do it easily, and that's exactly what made it real. So I was just proof?" Eliza asked, her voice no longer sharp, but full of confusion. "An experiment to prove a point in your family argument?" "No," Silas said quickly, the urgency in his voice undeniable. "You're the answer. You're everything I hope to find. Eliza, I'm not asking you to take my side. I'm not offering you money or a job. I was wrong to let Amelia approach you the way she did. That's on me. But now that you're here, now that you understand, I want to make a request." He took a step closer, not as a billionaire, but simply as an old man trying to protect the last memory of the woman he loved. "Please, help me. Not to fight my daughter, she's my flesh and blood, and I love her despite our differences. Help me protect my wife's legacy. Help me show Amelia, and maybe even myself, that my wife's philosophy wasn't just some romantic fantasy." "How?" Eliza whispered. "I'm just a waitress. By being you," Silas replied. "By showing me that true worth isn't in a $5,000 check, but in a $4 cup of coffee given at the right moment. By not letting the world's cynicism and bitterness snuff out the light inside you." His plea hung in the air. This was no longer just about Eliza. It had become something heavier, something that felt like a responsibility she hadn't asked for. She looked at Silas, this broken-hearted man trying to hold on to a legacy, then at Amelia, a powerful woman in her own right, hurting in ways that were harder to see, torn between the love for her mother and the cold logic of the world she had learned to survive in. Eliza felt trapped. Trapped between the anger of being pulled into a story that wasn't hers, and the compassion she couldn't ignore for the pain in front of her. She came here looking for a lifeline. Now she was being asked to become one, and she didn't know if she was strong enough to carry that weight. The silence of the library was broken by a cold, humorless laugh from Amelia. It wasn't joy, it was a shield, a brittle layer meant to cover something deeper, something wounded. "What a touching speech, Father," she said with biting sarcasm, slipping back into the armor of her usual composure. "You've found your saint, a naive waitress to help you prove to the world that your ideals still hold water." She turned to Eliza, her gaze sharp as a blade. But this time, Eliza didn't flinch. She met Amelia's eyes, not defiantly, but with quiet strength. "You heard him, Miss Vance. My father believes you're the answer, but me? I think you're just another dreamer, like my mother was. Your kindness, your empathy, none of that matters when you're faced with the brutal weight of reality, with despair that has roots too deep to pull out." Amelia crossed her arms, a picture of power and certainty. "Fine, you want to help him? I'll give you the chance. A real-world trial, not some idealistic fable." She picked up her tablet, swiped a few times, then turned the screen toward Eliza. On it was the image of a small, bleak town, nestled in a valley cloaked in fog. The houses looked tired. The streets were deserted. "This is Blackwood Creek," Amelia said, her voice clipped and businesslike. "A former coal town. The mine, the town's only source of livelihood, shut down last year. Most of the men are unemployed. Alcoholism and domestic violence are soaring. Despair hangs in the air like smoke." She zoomed in on a newer building, stark and out of place amid the decay. Our foundation invested nearly $500,000 to build a community center there, in the spirit of Isabel. The hope was to create a gathering place, a source of hope. But it was a spectacular failure. No one showed up. The people were too tired, too jaded, too divided to care. To them, it's just another empty building. Another promise from the rich that meant nothing. Amelia shut off the tablet and looked Eliza in the eyes, a challenging smile playing at her lips. "I'll take you there. You'll have 1 week. No additional funds from the foundation. Just you and your so-called kindness. Show me what kind of difference you can make in a place where money has already failed. And if after 1 week that center is still empty, promise me you'll walk away from my father, from this entire situation, and let us handle things our way." It was a trap. A clever, calculated trap, and Eliza knew it. Amelia wanted to prove that kindness was useless, that only cold strategy and money could solve anything. But as Eliza looked into Amelia's defiant stare, and then into Silas's pleading, hopeful eyes, she knew she couldn't back down. This wasn't just a test for her anymore. It was a test for the very belief her father had planted in her years ago, that even a single candle could push back the dark. "I accept," Eliza said, her voice steadier than she expected. The next day's drive to Blackwood Creek felt like entering another world, a world forgotten by time and abandoned by hope. Amelia drove a sleek SUV, and the silence between them was heavier than the gray, lifeless landscape outside. The town itself seemed to sag under the weight of its sorrow. Ramshackle wooden houses, wilted lawns, and hollow eyes watching from porches, blank and unreadable as they passed. Amelia stopped the car in front of the community center. It was a clean, newly built structure, but it looked cold and out of place, its doors always shut, a thin layer of dust gathering on the windows. "There's a small apartment upstairs for staff," Amelia said flatly. "It has the basics." She glanced at Eliza, her tone clipped. "I'll be back in 7 days. Good luck." There was a smirk on her lips as she said it, and then she drove off in her sleek SUV, leaving Eliza alone in silence, with nothing but the weight of abandonment hanging in the air. Eliza didn't try to do anything grand. She didn't put up posters or call for meetings. She knew trust here had eroded long ago, and promises only made things worse. So she started small with the things she knew how to do. She spent the entire first day cleaning. She threw open every window to let in fresh air, chasing out the stale smell of new paint and emptiness. She wiped down tables, washed every mug. In the kitchen, reorganized the old books in the tiny library. She worked quietly and steadily, not like a charity worker, but like someone caring for her own home. A few people passed by, peering in with wary curiosity, but no one said a word. On the second day, Eliza used what little money she had left to buy flour, sugar, eggs, and tea from the town's only grocery store. That afternoon, she baked butter, cookies. The warm scent of vanilla and butter drifted out through the open windows, a scent of life, of care, in a place that had long forgotten both. She set a pot of hot tea and a large plate of cookies on a table near the entrance next to a handwritten sign, "Free tea and cookies. Come warm up." At first, no one came. People walked by, glancing in with suspicion. A child tried to run inside, but was pulled back by his mother. Eliza didn't falter. She sat there, reading a book, sipping her tea, smiling at anyone who looked. She didn't call out. She didn't persuade. She was just there. Finally, near the end of the day, an old woman named Martha, whom Eliza had often seen sitting alone on the porch across the street, walked in with 2 small grandchildren trailing behind her. "It smells so nice," she said softly, almost apologetically. "Please, have some," Eliza replied warmly. "I may have baked a little too much." They sat down, and the children devoured the cookies with delight. Martha didn't say much, but she stayed for nearly an hour, sipping tea and gazing out the window. As she left, she murmured, "Thank you, dear. It's been a long time since someone did something for no reason at all." It was a beginning. The next day, word had spread about the free tea and cookies. A few more women showed up, wives of out-of-work miners, curious but guarded. They arrived in small groups, sat at separate tables, keeping their distance. Eliza didn't push. She simply refilled the teapot, brought out more cookies, and quietly cleared empty cups. She created a space without judgment where they could just sit. No need to talk, no need to pretend to be okay. Gradually, the cold walls of the center began to thaw. Soft conversations emerged. At first, it was small talk about the weather, their kids. Then deeper truths slipped through. Complaints about husbands who drank too much. Worries over unpaid bills. Stories of better days when the town still echoed with laughter. Eliza didn't offer solutions. She just listened. She became a silent witness to their pain and their strength. On the fourth day, Eliza rummaged through the supply closet and found old skeins of yarn and a few knitting needles. She brought them out and began knitting a simple scarf. Martha noticed and sat beside her. "Let me show you how to make it prettier," she said. Soon, a circle of women formed, knitting together hats, gloves for their kids. The soft clicking of needles, quiet laughter, and stories being passed around transformed the center into a warm living room. On the fifth day, Eliza brought comic books and colored paper. The local children, now comfortable with her presence, started coming in after school. Their clear, joyous laughter rang through the building for the first time, chasing out the lingering gloom. She didn't fix unemployment. She didn't cure addiction. She knew she couldn't, but she did something more important. She created a safe place where burdens could be set down, even if just for a moment. She reminded them that they were neighbors, that they were not alone. On the final day, as Eliza packed up to leave, she was stunned to find nearly every woman and child in town gathered at the center. They hadn't come to say goodbye with empty words. They had come to work. Some were sweeping. Others were reorganizing the books. Martha had drawn up a schedule, someone new each day, to make the tea and tend to the center. "We'll keep it going," Martha told her, pride shining in her eyes. "You didn't come here to save us. You came to remind us that we can save ourselves." She pressed a small jar of homemade strawberry jam into Eliza's hands. "For your sister," she said with a smile. When Amelia's luxury SUV rolled into view at the end of the street, she was stunned by what she saw. The community center was alive with chatter and laughter. Children played in the front yard. A few of the town's men, drawn in by the change, stood nearby, not scowling, but curious. Amelia stepped out, her tailored business suit looking comically out of place. She walked inside, taking it all in with silent disbelief. She didn't say a word on the ride back to the city, but this silence was no longer full of contempt. It was thoughtful. Disoriented. Eliza caught her glancing at her through the rearview mirror, now and then, not with scorn, but with something closer to uncertainty. Maybe even admiration. Far away, on a hill overlooking the valley, Silas Croft lowered his binoculars. He'd been there the whole week, watching from a small roadside inn. He'd seen it all, and he smiled. A real smile for the first time in years. Eliza hadn't just saved the building, she had saved his faith. And maybe, just maybe, she had begun to save his daughter too. Isabel would have been proud. The drive back from Blackwood Creek to the city was a strange journey in silence. But this silence was no longer hostile or tense like before. It was thick with unspoken thoughts. Eliza, exhausted but at peace, stared out the window, watching the scenery shift from barren hills to bustling suburbs, then finally to towering glass skyscrapers. She didn't feel like a victor, just someone who had done what she could. Beside her, Amelia drove with machine-like focus. The cold, confident facade she usually wore had begun to crack. Every now and then, Eliza caught her glancing through the rearview mirror, not with contempt this time, but with curiosity, confusion, and maybe even a hint of envy. Eliza had succeeded where Amelia's money and strategies had failed. And for someone who had built her life on numbers and perfect planning, that truth was hard to accept. Their final meeting took place in the same library where it had all begun. The conference room, lined with towering bookshelves and solemn portraits, looked unchanged. But the atmosphere was entirely different. This time, Eliza walked in not as someone being interrogated, but as an equal. Silas sat at the head of the long table. When he looked at Eliza, his eyes were warm, filled with open admiration. He looked like a father seeing his daughter return from a long, hard journey. Amelia sat beside him, not as a rival now, but as a quiet observer. She had traded her sleek business suit for a simple sweater. For the first time, Eliza saw fatigue on her face. "You did something remarkable, Eliza," Silas began, his voice thick with emotion. "You didn't bring money or elaborate plans. You brought something far more valuable: genuine care. You didn't try to fix their problems. You helped them remember that they had the strength to fix things themselves. You proved that Isabel's philosophy wasn't some naive dream." He slid a thick leather-bound folder across the table to her. "These are the documents to appoint you as executive director of the Isabel Foundation." Eliza was stunned. She glanced at Amelia, who simply looked down at the table, offering no objection. "You'll have full authority over all operations, all projects," Silas continued firmly. "Amelia will transition to overseeing the investment side of the company and retain only a non-voting board seat at the foundation. It's the only way I can be certain Isabel's legacy continues in the spirit she intended." It was an offer that could change Eliza's life forever: power, wealth, status. A worthy reward for everything she had endured. She could give Rose the best life possible, never worry about medical bills again. She could help thousands more, just like those in Blackwood Creek. It was a dream she never dared to dream. Her heart pounded. The temptation was overwhelming, but as she stared at the folder, at the dry legal terms, the clauses and conditions, Eliza felt nothing but distance. She thought about the women of Blackwood Creek, the clicking of knitting needles, the smell of cookies, the genuine smiles. Those things couldn't be outlined in a quarterly report or typed into a strategic plan. Gently, she pushed the folder back toward Silas. "I'm truly grateful, Mr. Croft," she said softly but firmly. "More than anything, I'm honored by your trust. But I can't accept this." Both Silas and Amelia looked up, stunned. This time, Amelia's surprise wasn't laced with scorn, it was genuine confusion. "Why?" she blurted. "This is everything people want, the power to do good." Eliza turned to her, and for the first time, she smiled at her, a smile of understanding. "Maybe, but the lesson in Blackwood Creek wasn't just for you, it was for me too. I realized I don't need a big foundation to make a difference. Sometimes, the bigger the structure, the more distance it creates. I don't want to sit in an office deciding who deserves help. I want to be with them." She looked back at Silas. "The most precious thing you gave me wasn't this opportunity. It was your belief that I could do something meaningful on my own. You reminded me of my worth, something I'd nearly forgotten. I don't want to inherit Isabel's legacy. I want to be inspired by it. To build something of my own, even if it's small." She took a deep breath, her voice filled with quiet passion. "I'm going to start with a cup of coffee." Then she shared her plan, an idea that had quietly taken root on the ride home. A small, humble coffee shop called The Second Cup, a place where customers could pay it forward. A cup of coffee, or a simple meal for someone who needed it. No judgment, no shame. Just a quiet act of kindness, passed on. A tiny business model built on trust and compassion. Amelia listened, her gray eyes wide. A master of billion-dollar mergers and intricate strategies, she sat there taking in a plan. So simple it almost seemed naive, but she didn't laugh. She saw the intelligence in it, the quiet beauty of simplicity. Silas listened too, and a radiant smile spread across his face. He understood. This was the true legacy, not inheriting someone else's mission, but creating a new one, born from the same spirit. Eliza wasn't rejecting him. She was honoring Isabel in the most authentic way. "That's the most brilliant idea I've ever heard," he said, his voice brimming with pride. He didn't push her anymore. He respected her choice. "I can't give you money to do it. That would go against everything you just said. But ... He pulled out his wallet and took out a crisp $100 bill. "Let me be your first customer. I want to prepay for 25 cups of coffee." Eliza looked at the bill, then at Silas and burst into tears. Not out of sadness or fear, but release, gratitude. After a pause, Amelia stood too. She walked over to Eliza. "Your plan has a flaw," she said. Her tone was professional. Again, but no longer cold. "You need a location, permits, a good coffee supplier at a reasonable price. Those aren't things kindness alone can solve." She placed a business card on the table. "This is my number. Call me when you're ready. I may not know how to warm hearts, but I do know how to negotiate a lease and find loopholes in business law. Consider it my investment in the second cup." She didn't wait for a reply, just nodded to Eliza and her father, then walked out of the room. That it was an unspoken reconciliation, and for now, that was enough. A few months later, the second cup opened on a quiet little street. It was a small, cozy space with sun-yellow walls, rustic wooden tables, and vibrant sunflower paintings by Rose hanging proudly on the walls. On a large chalkboard near the counter, a message read, "Today, you might be the one in need. Tomorrow, you might be the one who gives. There's always a second cup waiting for someone." One rainy afternoon, the cafe door swung open. Amelia Croft stepped inside, no business suit this time, just a simple sweater and jeans. She looked a little unsure, even hesitant. She walked up to the counter, where Eliza was standing. Rose, now healthier and brighter than ever, was wiping down tables nearby. "One black coffee, please," Amelia said quietly. Eliza smiled and made it for her. When Amelia reached into her wallet to pay, she added, "And cover 2 cups, please." She didn't explain. She took her coffee and moved to a quiet corner table, watching silently. From her seat, she saw Eliza gently welcome a homeless woman who had just stepped in. Eliza handed her the second cup, the one Amelia had just paid for. The woman began to cry, overcome with gratitude. Amelia took a sip of her coffee. It was bitter at first, but then came a sweet, warm aftertaste. She gazed out the window, where the rain still fell steadily. For the first time, she thought maybe her mother and father had been right. Maybe the true value of life wasn't in what you accumulate, but in what you give away. From behind the counter, Eliza caught Amelia's eyes. Across the room, they held each other's gaze for a moment. Eliza gave a quiet, grateful nod. Amelia nodded back. An unspoken understanding had formed between them. Eliza turned toward the window and saw the last autumn leaf drift gently from its branch, spinning softly in the breeze before landing on the ground. Her life had changed, not through wealth or power, but through a series of small, quiet choices. It had all started with one hard decision, one small act of sacrifice for a cup of coffee, and in that moment, she realized sometimes the best way to fill your own life is to give a piece of it away to someone else. And that was a melody she would never forget. Eliza and Silas's story didn't begin with a miracle. It didn't start with a winning lottery ticket or a fateful encounter on a red carpet. It began with a choice. A choice made on a rain-soaked day, when exhaustion and worry had nearly won. A choice to see someone else, even when you yourself felt invisible. In life, we often wait for big moments to make a difference. We think we need wealth, power, or endless time to help others. But the story of the second cup reminds us of a simpler truth. The power to change the world sometimes lies in the smallest of actions. A kind word, a moment of sincere listening, a cup of coffee offered at just the right time. Eliza didn't need saving. She needed someone to believe in her so she could believe in herself. And Silas, he wasn't looking for someone to inherit his wealth. He was searching for someone to carry on his faith. And maybe that's the greatest lesson. Kindness isn't about charity from above. True kindness is about empowerment. It's when you help someone else realize the strength they already have. Each of us, in our everyday lives, has a chance to offer our own second cup. It might not always be an actual coffee. It could be a smile, a word of encouragement, a moment of patience. We may never know how far that small act will ripple. It might not change the whole world, but it might change someone's world, and sometimes, that's all that really matters. Thank you for joining us on this heartfelt journey. If Eliza's story touched your heart, if it gave you a little inspiration to see the world with more kindness, then don't hesitate to like this video and share it with someone you love. And most importantly, subscribe to Dramatic Stories and hit the bell icon. Because here, we believe that every story holds the power to change something. And we have so many more meaningful stories waiting to be told. Let's keep spreading the good. We'll see you in the next video.